The office where Min Jun Kong has closed deals that reshaped industries, outlasted threats that broke lesser men, and never once let anyone see him flinch, that office is very quiet right now. Naomi Carter stands in the doorway, holding a letter in her hand and a bag over her shoulder, and she looks nothing like a woman falling apart. She looks like a woman who has decided something, which has always been far harder to argue with. She sets the resignation letter on his desk, not in his hand, on the desk, the way you leave something that isn't going to be refused, simply acknowledged. Min Jun stares at it without touching it. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling glass wall separating his inner office from the outer corridor, a woman stands watching them both. Elegant, still, with dark eyes that carry the particular patience of someone who has learned not to rush. She is a face from a photograph kept in a file nobody is allowed to touch. She is the name Min Jun buried so thoroughly that even the people closest to him have stopped asking what hollowed him out 6 years ago. She is standing 20 feet away. She is very much alive. Naomi's eyes move from the letter to Min Jun to the woman behind the glass and back. Nothing in her face breaks. She doesn't flinch, doesn't reach for anger, doesn't give him the small mercy of a scene he could respond to. She simply looks at him with the clear, steady eyes of a woman who decided something before she walked through this door and is only here now to follow through on it. "I'm not angry." Her voice is careful, precise, the voice she uses when she means every word and needs none of them misread. "I just refuse to be someone's second decision." She walks out before he finds a word to put in her path. The woman behind the glass watches Naomi leave. Then she turns back to Min Jun, her voice barely crossing the glass between them. "She's stronger than I was." Min Jun doesn't answer. He picks up the resignation letter, holds it in both hands, and stands in the center of everything he's built, not knowing, for the first time in 6 years, which direction a man like him is supposed to walk. Before we go further, do you think Naomi is right to walk, or is she leaving before the whole truth has a chance to surface? Tell us below, then stay with us, because this part is going to hurt before it heals. And if Afro-Korean drama tales is new to you today, the subscribe button is right there. You won't want to miss where this goes. Several weeks have passed since the night Naomi Carter stood on her small balcony and chose Min Jun Kong on her own terms. No arrangement between them, no audience watching, nothing borrowed from anyone else's expectations. What they built in the weeks that followed was quiet and real and slightly terrifying in the way that only things worth having tend to be. The kind of closeness that arrives not with fanfare, but with breakfast schedules, shared silences, and the slow, growing realization that you've stopped imagining the day it ends. 3 days ago, that changed. A face walked into Kang Holdings that nobody in this world was supposed to ever see again, escorted by 2 men from an organization whose name spoken inside Min Jun's circles tends to clear a room. Her name is Soo Yun, and the last time Min Jun saw her face, he was standing at a funeral she was supposed to be inside. Who is she? What really happened to her? How is she here now at this precise moment when everything between Min Jun and Naomi is still new enough to bruise? And who found her first? Because Soo Yun did not walk through that door on her own, and the person who opened it for her had a very particular reason for choosing this exact window of time. One more question lives beneath all the others, quieter and harder than the rest. Is Min Jun still the same man who loved Soo Yun 6 years ago? And does the answer to that cost Naomi everything she's built, or does it finally set them both free?
6 years ago, before Min-Jun Kong became the man who closes boardrooms with a look and settles disputes without raising his voice, there was a version of him that laughed more easily, moved through the world with less precision and more warmth, and loved a woman without the careful, measured restraint that defines everything he does now. Her name was Su-Yun. She wasn't from his world. She taught secondary literature studies on the other side of the city, lived in a small apartment not entirely unlike Naomi's, and spent 2 years being quietly astonished by Min-Jun's ability to separate the man she knew from the organization that bore his name. She never asked him to leave it. She only asked him once to make sure it never came looking for her. He thought he had. He was wrong. The Daejin organization, a rival network that has spent the better part of a decade in strategic conflict with Kang Holdings, staged Su-Yun's death during a power transition, when Min-Jun's father was handing over the organization and the whole structure was temporarily, fatally distracted.
They took her cleanly, provided Min-Jun a body that forensics identified as a match, and held her for 6 years as a quiet intelligence asset, a woman who knew Kong family routines, schedules, and emotional geography better than any paid operative ever could. Su-Yun survived by being useful and giving Daejin only enough to stay valuable, never everything, never the information that would have made her disposable. She has been waiting, with a patience that would have broken most people, to the moment when she could stop waiting entirely. That moment is now. Daejin brought her to Kong Holdings not as a gift, but as a negotiating chip, believing Min-Jun's grief would make him pliable. They do not yet understand that grief for Min-Jun Kong is not an open wound. It is a room he sealed shut and has not entered in years. In the weeks following Part 1's resolution, Naomi and Min-Jun found each other the way people do when all the obstacles have been cleared, but both of them are still braced for more. Carefully, incrementally, with a great deal of unspoken checking that neither of them acknowledged out loud. Min-Jun showed up at her apartment twice that first week for reasons he constructed out of work. She let him. The third time he arrived with no reason at all, she left the door unlocked and made enough coffee for 2, and neither of them mentioned what that meant. By the third week, it had a shape, not a name yet, but a shape, the kind that forms between 2 people who have seen each other under real pressure and decided independently that what they saw was someone worth building toward. Naomi noticed something was wrong 2 days before Su-Yun arrived. Min-Jun went quiet in a specific register she hadn't heard from him before. Not the controlled silence of a man managing information, but the hollow quiet of a man colliding with something he had no prepared response to. She chose not to push. She told herself that patience was a form of respect, and that he would come to her when he was ready. That gap, 2 days of patience, 2 days of choosing not to ask, was exactly the space Yuna needed. Yuna Cho, stripped of a fiancé and a future she'd been handed before she could want anything for herself, spent the weeks after Part 1 doing what quietly dangerous people always do when ordinary power is taken from them. She researched. She dug into Min-Jun's past not with any clear plan in mind, but with the obsessive focus of someone who needs to understand how she lost something she was never fully allowed to have. What she found 3 weeks in, through an older contact of her family's who still moves in the gray space between legitimate business and Daejin's orbit, was Su-Yun, a woman, alive, held, significant. Su-Yun sat with this for 4 days, turning it over, measuring its weight. She understood what she held wasn't just information, it was a detonator. The question was whether she was the kind of woman willing to pull the pin. On the 5th day, she sent Naomi an anonymous message, a photograph, a name, and 1 line, ask him who he buried. Then she sat back in her quiet apartment surrounded by the ghost of wedding flowers she never chose the color of and waited to see what the truth would do on its own. She told herself this wasn't the same as before. No hired men, no blades, just information finding its way to where it belonged. She almost believed it, right up until the part where she made the phone call that unraveled everything, including herself. Naomi receives the anonymous message on a Tuesday evening, alone in her apartment, and reads it twice before setting the phone face down on the table. She doesn't call Min-jun, she doesn't call anyone. She makes tea she doesn't drink, and sits with the photograph in front of her, studying the face of a woman who clearly means something to the man she's been slowly learning to trust, and asking herself the question she's been carefully not asking since the night she and Min-jun found their footing. What is it that he hasn't told me? She always knew there was something. 2 years of working beside him had given her every version of his silence except one, the kind that lives in the past instead of the present. She had set it aside under "give him time" and moved on. That filing system has just been overturned. The following morning, she goes to work. She does her job. She doesn't look any different to anyone who doesn't know her well enough, and very few people do. Min-jun glances at her twice across the morning's first meeting with the specific attention of a man who is checking on someone without wanting to be caught checking, and finds nothing in her face that tells him she's carrying anything new. She's always been better at this than he is. By mid-morning, Min-jun is gone from the floor. His assistant mentions a closed meeting on the 22nd floor, unscheduled, no guest name on the log, blinds drawn. Naomi has a photograph in her bag of a woman she has never met. She keeps working.
On the 22nd floor, in a conference room with the blinds drawn, Min-jun sits across from a Daejin representative named Park, a slim, unhurried man in his 50s who speaks the way expensive lawyers do, slowly and without apparent concern for whose time he's spending. Soo-yoon sits at the far end of the table and does not look at either of them. Park's proposal is dressed in the language of business negotiation, but the structure beneath it is simple enough. Daejin has something Min-jun lost and has been living without for 6 years. They'd like to discuss the terms under which that loss might be reversed, specifically a renegotiation of the shipping corridor dispute that has defined the relationship between the two organizations for the better part of a decade, tilted this time significantly in Daejin's favor. Min-jun listens to the full proposal without interruption. When Park finishes, the room is quiet for a moment that stretches just long enough to become uncomfortable for everyone in it except Min-jun. "You brought her here as leverage." His voice carries nothing that could be called emotion. "You've held her for 6 years and brought her here today because you believe what I feel for her makes me a worse negotiator than I actually am." Park maintains a careful smile. "We believe it creates a context for productive dialogue." "Then you've miscalculated what I feel." Min-jun straightens the folder in front of him, an inch to the left, unhurried. "She's someone I once loved. She's not a variable in a business arrangement, and neither am I." He stands. The meeting, by every signal except a spoken word, is over. "I'll have her released from your arrangement independently." His voice stays level, almost gentle. "I'd suggest your organization makes peace with that outcome, because the alternative involves a level of attention from my legal team that Daejin's current structure isn't built to absorb." Park's smile doesn't shift, but his hands, flat on the table, press down slightly, the only tell Min-jun needs. He's already walking toward the door when it opens from the other side. Naomi Carter is standing there, with a folder of afternoon contracts in her hand, and the specific expression of a woman who has just seen something she was hoping not to see, because the confirmation of a fear is never the same as the fear itself. Soo-yoon at the end of the table, Min-jun 2 feet from the door. both of them present and accounted for in the same room, with a history visible from across a corridor. Naomi's eyes take in all three in under a second. She nods once at Min-jun, professional, unreadable, sets the folder on the side table, and leaves without a word. 3 weeks earlier, Naomi's apartment, late on a Thursday, the kind of late that arrives before either person notices they've stayed that long. The work they'd used as an excuse 2 hours before was long finished, but neither had manufactured a reason to leave, and the city outside her thin curtains had gone quiet in the particular way it does after midnight, when the whole world seems briefly smaller and less dangerous than it actually is. Naomi had turned from the kitchen counter with 2 cups and found Min-jun watching her in a way he hadn't bothered to disguise. The unusualness of that, Min-jun Kang, undisguised, stopped her in the middle of the room. "You're staring." "I'm aware." His voice carried no apology in it at all. She'd crossed the remaining distance without hurrying, set both cups on the coffee table, and looked at him steadily for a moment before she reached up and kissed him first, direct, unhurried, no performance in it. The kind of kiss that doesn't ask for permission because it's already past the point where asking would be honest. Min-jun's hand had found the back of her head, and for one long moment he'd kissed her back like a man who had forgotten that restraint was supposed to be his default setting. Just warm, present, unguarded in a way he hadn't let himself be with anyone in 6 years. When they pulled back, Naomi picked up both cups without any ceremony. Tea's going cold. He'd laughed, low, unguarded, the same laugh that had started Yuna's problems, and the evening had continued, and later he drove home through empty streets, thinking about nothing in particular, which was something he hadn't been able to do in longer than he could clearly remember. The flashback closes. The 22nd floor fills back in around the present. The tea is very cold now. Min-jun finds Naomi at her desk 40 minutes after the conference room, having removed Park from the building, arranged temporary alternative accommodation for Soo-yoon outside Daejin's reach, and spent the elevator ride deciding that 6 years of silence ends today. He closes her office door. She doesn't look up from what she's reading. "You don't have to explain anything to me. She's clearly from before. That's your business." It stopped being only my business the moment someone sent you a photograph. He crosses to the chair across from her desk and sits, elbows on knees, forward, open, making no attempt at height or distance, a posture she has never once seen from him before. "You got an anonymous message, a face, a line about someone I buried." He holds her gaze. "You should have told me, not because you asked, but because you matter to me."
And I let that truth live inside me like something I could keep private. I was wrong. Naomi finally looks up. She studies his face with the slow, thorough attention she gives to anything she needs to understand fully before she responds. "Tell me then. All of it." So he does. It takes 30 minutes, longer than Min-jun has spoken about anything personal in 6 years, and Naomi listens all the way through without interrupting. The woman he loved, the war between families, the staged death, the funeral, the grief that rewired him completely, the 6 years of armor, the way Naomi herself had gotten past that armor not by force, but by simply being so consistently, infuriatingly real that there was no reasonable defense against her. When he finishes, the office is very quiet. Naomi lets the quiet sit for a long moment before she answers. I needed to hear all of that. Her voice is steady, but the steadiness costs something. He can see exactly where it costs something, around her eyes. The reason it hurts isn't Soo-yeon. It's that you've been standing next to me every day, and that whole story lived inside you, and I didn't know it existed. Not because I didn't ask, because you decided I didn't need to know yet. I know. I need some time. She picks up her pen, not to write anything, just to have something in her hand. Not because I've decided anything, because I haven't yet and I need to get there on my own terms. Min-jun nods, stands, moves toward the door, stops. The resignation letter. He doesn't turn around. Don't send it, not until you've decided. Give me that much. A pause long enough to mean something. I'll think about it. He accepts it and leaves, which is how Naomi knows he's actually listening. That evening, in the small apartment where so much of this story has already unfolded, Naomi Carter sits at her kitchen table with a resignation letter she's been carrying since morning and asks herself plainly what she actually wants. Not what's safe, not what's sensible, what she wants. She has spent her whole life in rooms where people answered that question on her behalf, assumed what she could handle, assumed what she deserved, assumed that because she carried things quietly, she must not be carrying much. She is tired of being assumed about. She is 32 years old and has rebuilt her life from less than nothing twice already, and she knows more clearly than most people her age exactly what she can survive. The question isn't whether she can survive this. The question is whether what she and Min-jun have built is real enough to be worth the work of building it alongside his past, in full view of it, without the comfort of having been told sooner. She thinks about the night he found her tied to a ceiling pipe in this very apartment. She thinks about the way his hands weren't entirely steady when he cut her down, the first time she ever witnessed him unsteady about anything, the first crack in the armor she'd watched him wear for 2 years, across every conference room and difficult negotiation and moment of deliberate calm. She thinks about 3 weeks later, when he showed up at her door with no excuse and no folder and nothing in his hands at all, and she left the door unlocked because she already knew. She thinks about how trust isn't given once and then held indefinitely. It's chosen, again and again, in the specific direction of someone who keeps doing the things that make the choice worth making. The resignation letter sits on the table. She doesn't send it. She also doesn't destroy it. She puts it in the kitchen drawer, not decided, not abandoned, just held in place while she finishes arriving at the truth she already half knows, and goes to bed early for the first time in weeks. She lies awake listening to the city moving at its usual pace outside her window, and she does not know yet what she will do in the morning, but she knows who she is. That has always been the part she could rely on most, and it is enough to get her to morning. The following morning, Min-jun meets Soo-yeon in a private room at a property his organization keeps for exactly this category of meeting: discreet, off the grid, clean of any surveillance that isn't his own. She looks in daylight and without Daejin's people in the room, nothing like the leverage they tried to make her into. She looks like a woman who has had exactly enough time to figure out who she is without anyone else's definition attached to her, which is a particular kind of stillness that only arrives through real difficulty and comes out the other side of it. She pours her own tea before he offers it and sits across from him with both hands wrapped around the cup, looking at him with eyes that have changed more in 6 years than his have, which tells him something important about who did the harder surviving between them. You don't have to feel guilty. Her voice is direct, unhurried, the voice of a woman who has rehearsed this opening long enough that it no longer costs her anything to say it. I know you believed what they showed you, I know you grieved, and I know you moved forward. A brief pause, deliberate, not pained. I can see that you've moved forward, Min-jun. It's visible from across a room, from across a conference table.
Probably from the corridor, if I'm being honest. He doesn't deny it. I want out. She sets the cup down with the particular finality of someone who has finally reached the sentence they've been building toward for 6 years. Not a conversation, not a negotiation, not a reunion of any kind. I want out of Daejin's arrangement. I want a name they don't have on file, a document trail that holds up, and a city I chose for myself with no one else's fingerprints on the decision. That is everything I came here for. Not to undo anything, not to complicate anything that doesn't need complicating. Just out. I can do that. I know you can. That's why I let them bring me here. She studies him for a moment the way she used to, the particular look he remembered, the one that always made him feel both understood and slightly outmaneuvered. Your secretary, the one who walked into that conference room yesterday, she's extraordinary. She's not my secretary anymore. He finds the honest answer before the comfortable one. She's deciding what she is. Su-Yan holds his gaze for a long moment. Something crosses her face that isn't quite a smile and isn't quite sadness. It is the expression of a woman who recognizes a man being better than his previous version, which is the most generous thing one person can observe about another. Then stop standing here and go make it worth deciding. She reaches across the table briefly and covers his hand with hers. Not a reclamation, not a reopening of anything. A farewell between two people who survived something that was designed to have no survivors, given the ending it was always owed. The logistics of Su-Yan's exit take 2 hours. By the end of them, she has a new name, a document trail, a one-way arrangement out of the city, and contact details for a property in a country she mentioned once, 6 years ago, that she'd always wanted to see before she ran out of time for wanting things. She stands at the door of the room, bag over one shoulder, and looks at Min-Jun one final time with the clear, unencumbered gaze of a woman who has finished with something and knows exactly that she's finished. She crosses the space between them and kisses him, once, briefly, with the precise deliberateness of someone pressing a letter closed before sending it somewhere it can never be retrieved from. Not hunger, not hope, just a farewell given its proper shape instead of the disappearance they were both handed 6 years ago. Min-Jun goes very still. For a half second, just one, the grief behind the sealed door makes itself felt, present, maimed, real, finally given somewhere to land. And then he steps back, gently, both hands at his sides, the way a man returns something carefully to the place it was always meant to rest. Su-Yan tilts her head. The near smile that crosses her face is the one he remembered best from 6 years ago. Go find her. She walks out. The door closes. He stands in a quiet room and lets 6 years finish being carried. Back at Kang Holdings, while Min-Jun manages Su-Yan's exit through channels that leave no paper trail worth following, Hana surfaces with the information that completes the picture no one was supposed to fully see. The photograph Naomi received did not come from Daejin. The number trail points to a burner device purchased 3 weeks ago, 2 blocks from the Cho family estate. Hana delivers this finding with the same careful neutrality she reserves for everything she knows won't be easy to hear. Min-Jun absorbs it without visible reaction. Yuna found Su-Yan before Daejin brought her to us. She found out Su-Yan existed. Hana sets the tablet on the desk. We don't yet know how deep her contact inside Daejin goes. What we know is that she reached out to someone inside their network to get this information, which means that someone now knows Yuna Cho has a personal interest in Kang Holdings' internal history. Which means Daejin knows she's a loose thread. The calculation runs visibly behind his eyes, and loose threads get pulled. Hana doesn't state the obvious next step. She doesn't have to. Min-Jun crosses to the window. Yuna Cho, the woman who sent a man into Naomi's apartment with a blade, is now exposed to the same organization she used to set his world on fire. The symmetry of it would be interesting if the stakes weren't what they are. Watch her. Flat. Certain. Already decided. Don't engage. Just watch. Tell me the moment anything moves. 2 days after the conference room, Naomi shows up to work without having sent the resignation letter. Min-Jun notices immediately and says nothing about it, which is its own kind of language between them. The day moves the way days move when two people are circling something unresolved. Professionally clean, technically seamless, the work done at exactly the standard it always is, while the space between them carries a charge that everyone on the floor instinctively gives extra room. At 3:15, Naomi passes Min-jun in the corridor, and he pauses long enough to say quietly, so only she can hear it, "She's gone. She got what she came for. She won't be back."
Naomi holds his gaze for a moment. "I know. Hana told me this morning." A brief beat. The corner of his mouth shifts, not quite a smile, just an acknowledgement that lands precisely. "Of course she did. I'm still thinking." Her voice carries no apology in it. "That's still where I am." "I know." He moves toward his next meeting, then stops without turning around. "For what it's worth, I would tell you now. If anything else existed that you didn't know about, I would tell you now." She doesn't answer him, but she doesn't look away from the place where he was standing until he rounds the corner, which is its own kind of answer, and he knows it. That evening, she takes the resignation letter out of the kitchen drawer and reads it one more time. Then she folds it in half, puts it at the bottom of the drawer under a takeout menu she hasn't used in a year, and goes to make dinner, which is, for Naomi Carter, as close to a decision as tonight is going to get, and sometimes that's enough. The call Yuna makes to her Daejin contact is the third one since she sent the photograph to Naomi, and it is, by any reasonable measure, the one she should never have made. The first two were reconnaissance, disguised as checking in, really as watching to see whether the fire she lit had caught. How had Naomi responded? Was Min-jun showing signs of strain? Was the plan working? The third call is something rawer than strategy. It is hunger. The specific appetite of a person watching a fire they started and needing to be closer to the heat than is safe. The man she reaches on the third call listens to her questions with the pleasant patience of someone who has been waiting for exactly this level of overreach. He doesn't rush her. He lets her ask everything she came to ask, and then he asks her one question in return. "Where are you right now?" She tells him because she hasn't yet learned that a question from someone inside Daejin is never simply a question. It is an intake form. 2 hours later, Yuna Cho is in a car she didn't choose, going to a location she wasn't given in advance. Her family is 3 unanswered calls into their evening. The full weight of what she's miscalculated settles over her with the cold, specific clarity of a diagnosis she should have seen coming and didn't. She isn't going to be hurt. Daejin doesn't benefit from a Cho family death when the Kong situation is already complicated enough to manage. But she is going to be held, quietly and invisibly, until they decide exactly how to use what she knows, which is the worst kind of held because it looks from the outside like nothing at all. Nobody is looking for her yet. Nobody even knows to start. Hana brings Min-jun the news at 7 in the evening, 14 hours after he told her to watch and report. She moved. Hana's voice carries the precise absence of editorializing she reserves for information she knows will land badly. Daejin has her, contained, not harmed. They're holding her at the Seok District property, the one that rotates through catering business fronts every 18 months. Min-jun is quiet for a long moment. How long before her family notices? Her father called twice in the last hour. A third missed call goes to their private security. After that, it escalates publicly fast. A public escalation is the worst possible outcome. 2 families, a canceled wedding, a rival organization, and a missing woman with direct knowledge of Min-jun's personal history, combining into a story that no amount of legal muscle manages cleanly once it reaches the open air. He stands, buttons his cuff in the slow, deliberate way the people who work for him have learned means decisions have been finalized, not still being made. Who do we have available? 4 I trust, and 2 I can vouch for. Hana pulls up the location on her tablet. The Seok District property runs light security during evening shifts, 3 on rotation, 1 static on the perimeter. They're not expecting extraction. They're expecting a negotiation request from the Cho family by morning. Good. Min-jun takes his jacket from the back of his chair. Let's make sure they don't have time to adjust their expectations. The Seok District property at night looks exactly like what it claims to be, a mid-sized catering operation closed for the evening, loading dock at the rear, 1 office light burning that has nothing to do with catering.
Min-jun arrives with 4 people, arranged with the quiet efficiency that characterizes everything he does at this level. No announcement, no approach speech. Entry through the loading dock in the 40-second window between the perimeter guard's rotation and the door alarm cycling, a window Hana identified by cross-referencing building permit filings with the security contractor logs the catering front filed publicly 2 years ago and forgot about. The static guard on the perimeter is the first complication.
Better positioned than Daejin's usual street-level personnel, he moves to intercept before Min-jun's lead man reaches the dock door. What follows is short, controlled, and resolved with a joint lock that puts the guard on the ground without a sound and keeps him there without permanent damage. Min-jun's standing instruction, followed because his people understand what happens when they don't follow it. Inside, 2 more guards. One goes down to the second member of Min-jun's team before he finishes turning around. The other reaches his weapon, a compact sidearm at his hip, and gets 2 steps toward the back office before Min-jun moves at an angle the guard doesn't track until the weapon is already redirected downward and out of his grip. Min-jun's forearm crosses his throat with exactly enough pressure to make the next several seconds unambiguous. Where is she? The guard nods toward the back office. Min-jun releases him, leaves him seated against the wall with 2 of his people standing over the corridor, and opens the door. Yuna Cho is sitting in a metal chair, hands unbound. Daejin was never going to rough her up. She's too valuable for that. With her jacket still on and her composure holding together in a way that must be costing her something she won't account for until later. She looks up when the door opens. When she sees who it is, the expression that crosses her face is one that defies easy description. Not gratitude, not relief, something closer to the complicated acknowledgement of a debt she already knows she can't repay, issued by someone she has no right to expect help from. You came. Her voice is stripped of everything except the plain fact of it. You made a mistake. Min-jun stands in the doorway with the same calm level he brings to everything. I've made enough of my own to know what they look like. Let's go. They are 2 minutes from the extraction point when Hana's name appears on Min-jun's phone screen. He picks up before the second ring. Hana's voice, for the first time in their years of working together, carries something that edges toward urgency. They moved while you were inside. Daejin had a secondary team already deployed. They weren't trying to keep Yuna. She was the distraction. A half beat. Min-jun, their real target tonight is Naomi. The street outside the Seok property goes still in the particular way that only happens inside Min-jun's head when everything clarifies at once. How long ago did they move? 19 minutes. A car was spotted on her street. I've been trying to reach her for 12 minutes and she hasn't picked up. He's already running the numbers. Her apartment is 22 minutes from this location in normal conditions. These are not normal conditions, and it is evening, and 22 minutes is too long. Beside him in the back of the car, Yuna Cho has heard enough to understand what's happening. She doesn't look at Min-jun. She doesn't ask permission. She looks at the window, at the street sliding past outside it, and then she picks up the phone that Min-jun's second man recovered from the Daejin guards. Basic handset, active, charged. She finds Naomi Carter's number in Min-jun's contact list without explanation, and she dials. It rings twice. Naomi picks up. Yuna's voice is flat, no drama in it at all, the voice of a woman who is done performing anything. I know you have every reason not to listen to me. There's a car on your street right now, dark sedan, dented rear panel on the driver's side, parked facing away from your building entrance. That means they're watching the exit, not the front door. They came in through the back. Go out the front. Don't take anything. Don't hesitate. Go now.
A silence on the line that lasts exactly 3 seconds, then the sound of Naomi moving. Yuna ends the call and sets the phone on the seat between herself and the window. She doesn't say anything else for the remainder of the drive. Her hands are clasped in her lap and her eyes stay forward, and she doesn't look at anyone who might try to read her face, because some things a person does aren't for being watched, they're just for being done. Naomi Carter exits through the front of her building 37 seconds after hanging up the phone. She doesn't freeze, she doesn't reach for what to bring. She evaluates, chooses the front because she was just told to, and walks out of the lobby at a pace that reads as completely ordinary, not running, not visibly alarmed, just a woman going somewhere with a reason for being there. She has spent 2 years beside a man who moves through dangerous spaces by refusing to look like he's moving through dangerous spaces, and some training arrives without anyone intending it as training. She spots the dark sedan immediately, dented rear panel exactly where Yuna said it would be. She crosses the street diagonally away from it, walks 2 blocks at the same unhurried pace, and steps into a lit convenience store where she stands between 2 shelves of bottled water and texts Min-jun a single line: "I'm safe, we need to talk." 3 blocks behind her, the 2 Daejin operatives who entered through the rear of her building spend 4 minutes in an empty apartment before the understanding finishes reaching them that something in their evening has gone comprehensively wrong. Min-jun's car arrives at her building 13 minutes later.
She isn't there. He reads "I'm safe" on his phone screen and sits back in the seat and breathes out through his nose once, in the specific, slow way he only allows himself when no one except Hana is close enough to notice. Yuna is still in the car beside him, still looking out the window. "Thank you." The words land without qualification, without adjectives, just the plain fact of them, which from Min-jun Kang is more than most people who've earned it ever actually receive. Yuna doesn't turn from the glass. Don't thank me. Just make sure she doesn't spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder because of something I put in motion. He doesn't answer that directly, but he doesn't look away from her until the car turns the corner, which tells her, without a word, that the account between them isn't as simple as either of them expected it to be. The week that follows operates on 2 tracks simultaneously. On the first, Min-jun begins the methodical dismantling of Daejin's local operational structure, not through confrontation, which generates witnesses and paperwork, but through financial pressure applied by a man who has spent a decade understanding exactly how organizations like Daejin sustain themselves. He pulls threads, he redirects funding channels with a surgeon's precision, closing avenues that took years to build in the time it takes most people to schedule a meeting about closing them. He calls in 3 favors from regulatory contacts he's been holding in reserve for precisely this category of problem, and he places 2 calls to Daejin's own internal leadership. Quiet, specific, offering a clean line of separation from the local faction that escalated far past its authorization by moving directly against a Kang Holdings employee, and in doing so, creating exposure that no professional operation can afford. The offer is structured so precisely in Daejin's own interest that refusing it would require them to explain internally why they protected a faction that generated more heat than it was ever worth. They accept within 48 hours, which is faster than Min-jun expected, and tells him something useful about how poorly regarded the local faction was from above, which is information he files away for future use and says nothing about to anyone. On the second track, Hana quietly finalizes Su-yeon's exit, documents processed, travel arranged, a new beginning in a city she chose. Su-yeon leaves on a Thursday morning with a bag the same size as the one she arrived with and sends Min-jun a single message from a number that will be unreachable by Friday. City is beautiful. You were right about the coffee. He doesn't know which city it is. She didn't tell him because it's hers. He finds, to his mild surprise, that this doesn't bother him even slightly. It is the first genuinely uncomplicated thing in weeks, and he allows himself to appreciate it for a full minute before setting the phone face down and returning to the work in front of him. Yuna returns to her family's house quieter than she left it and spends the days that follow in the particular stillness that arrives after a person has done something they can neither take back nor entirely regret. She doesn't reach out to Min-jun. She doesn't reach out to Naomi. She sits with what she did, all of it, in both parts of this story, beginning to end, and she doesn't try to build a version of it that makes any of it simple or justified. She started something with hired hands and a blade, she escalated it with information used as a weapon, and at the very end, cornered in the back of a car she didn't choose, she picked up a stranger's phone and warned the woman she'd spent months trying to erase. Those things are all true at the same time. She doesn't know yet what to do with a self that contains all of them simultaneously, but she has, for the first time, stopped trying to pretend one set cancels the other. What Yuna Cho understands 3 weeks out from the night she rode home in the back of Min-jun's car is this: the worst version of herself and the better one were always living in the same body. The difference was only ever which one she chose to listen to first. She chose wrong for a long time. At the very end, she chose differently. That's not forgiveness. It's not a clean slate. It's not even, honestly, a beginning yet. But it is a direction, and it belongs to her, and she earned the right to it the hardest possible way. She starts therapy in April, not because anyone told her to, because she finally wants to understand herself better than her worst moments have understood her. The story doesn't close her door with a neat bow. Real ones never do. 3 weeks after the night Naomi walked out of her building on a stranger's warning, after the dust of every moving piece has settled into its new shape, Min-jun Kang drives himself to her small apartment on a Saturday afternoon with nothing in his hands and no business reason in the world. She opens the door before he knocks. She always has. He steps inside. The afternoon light comes through the thin curtains the same way it has since the very beginning of this story. The same curtains, the same light, the same ceiling pipe above the living room that has since been repaired and repainted and now holds nothing except a memory neither of them has tried to forget, because forgetting would mean pretending it didn't happen, and it happened, and it's part of what they are made of now. You came empty-handed. There's a small smile already at the edge of her mouth, the knowing one she saves for when he does something that surprises her by being simple. I'm done bringing reasons to see you. He reaches into the inner pocket of his jacket and holds out a ring, not ostentatious, not designed to impress anyone who isn't her, the kind of thing she would have chosen herself if anyone had ever thought to ask. I have spent 6 years being careful with everything that mattered to me. I wasn't careful enough, and I lost something. And then I found you, and I was too careful in different ways, kept too much inside, moved too slowly, let my past take up space in our present without telling you it was there. He holds her gaze with nothing managed between them, nothing performed. I would like to stop being that careful. I would like to be known, specifically and completely by you, for however long you'll have me. Naomi looks at the ring, then at him. Then she does what she has done every single time he has given her something real to respond to. She takes her time. She doesn't perform. She doesn't reach for the easy, comfortable answer before she's finished arriving at the honest one. That is, Naomi tilts her head slightly, the most words I have ever heard you say consecutively in 2 years. I'm aware. Don't get used to it. She reaches out and takes the ring from his hand. She puts it on herself. Her hand, her pace, her decision, which is exactly what Naomi Carter would do, and which stops his breath more completely than any boardroom confrontation or physical threat has managed in recent memory. Then she closes the remaining distance and pulls him down by the collar and kisses him in the late afternoon light of her small apartment. Her timing, her choice, on terms that have always been and will always be entirely her own. This is the third kiss, and it carries everything the first two were building toward. No urgency, no goodbye. Only certainty worn as lightly as something that was always going to be true. Outside, the city moves at its usual pace, indifferent, alive, unbothered by what's happening in one small apartment on an ordinary afternoon. Inside, two people choose each other plainly in the room where everything that tried to stop them once began, and find it is, without question, the best possible use of a space with a difficult history. There is a version of this story, both parts of it, where Min Jun Kang lives his entire life inside the careful architecture he built from grief, choosing the safety of silence over the risk of being fully known, duty over desire, certainty over the terrifying honesty of loving someone without a net beneath him. It's a stable life, quiet and controlled and impressively managed, a life shaped entirely around the outline of what he'd already lost. But this is not that story. This is the one where a woman came back from the dead and, instead of reclaiming what had been hers, gave back what she'd never taken, the permission to finish grieving and walk forward without carrying it. The one where a woman shaped by jealousy and years of being chosen without being loved made her worst choices, and then at the one moment that mattered most, made her best one. The one where a woman who spent her whole adult life being underestimated by every room she entered, looked at all of it, the grief, the ghost, the rival organization, the danger, the silence, and decided that none of it was a sufficient reason to walk away from someone who had finally, fully chosen to be honest. Some people come back into your life to remind you of who you were. The right ones stay to find out who you've become. Min Jun Kang spent 6 years being the man his grief made him, sealed, precise, protected behind every wall he'd built to make sure he'd never be surprised by loss again. It took 2 stories, 2 women, and 1 ordinary Saturday afternoon to show him the difference between surviving a loss and actually, finally living past it. And Naomi Carter, who has outworked every assumption ever made about her, who has chosen herself on her own terms in every room that tried to reduce her. She didn't rescue him. She didn't wait passively to be selected. She simply kept being herself, fully and without apology, in his vicinity, until the only reasonable thing left for him to do was rise all the way to meet it. That's not a fairy tale. That's something rarer and more durable. That's what real looks like when it survives being tested. Yuna warned Naomi in the end. Does that one act change how you feel about her, or is it too little to balance what she started? And Naomi put that ring on herself. Would you have done the same, or would you have made him do it? Tell us everything below. And if part 3 is what you want, say the word and we'll build it. And if Afro-Korean drama tales found you today through this story, subscribe, because every script we make is built to stay with you long after the screen goes dark.